Good morning and welcome to the second Crowdstorm class with Skillshare. My name is Sean Abramson and I will be your teacher. So we won't get to talk this time around, but as you'll notice, there are a few online opportunities to connect, and you should also find me online adding comments as you add your project. So we'll have a couple of different opportunities to interact, and of course you can always message me directly. Anyway, the reason I'm here is I've been interested in how large groups of people work together online. This has been an interest going back probably about 5 years, and it got me to a point about a year ago where I had an opportunity with two of my co-authors to research and put together a book called Crowdstorm. And as we looked at the different types of crowdsourcing, we zeroed in on one particular area which has to do with how people find ideas and how they evaluate those ideas. And so to give a little bit of context, if we think about all the ways in which we see crowdsourcing today, we kind of need to go back a little bit, almost 100 years, to a Nobel Prize-winning economist by the name of Ronald Coase. And Ronald Coase is interesting because Ronald asked a very simple question, seemingly simple question, which is, why do we organize organizations the way that we do? Or how do we organize firms or companies the way that we do? And he looked at a range of options. On the one end, I can hire everyone, and I can try and have everyone work for me. And on the other end of the spectrum, I have an opportunity to go to the marketplace and sort of advertise a job as I need it, and then hire someone just to do that work and then let them go again, or basically hire freelancers. And so he tried to figure out, why is it that a firm would choose to do one or the other? Why is it that you would choose to have a full-time person versus a freelancer? And from this discussion, he came up with a list or a number of different transaction costs. In other words, there are some hidden costs related to finding people as you need them. So the one simple one is, how do you find them, right? Obviously, if you have an employee, you have the email, you know where they work every day, they're very easy to find. Not so with a freelancer. If I had to go and find a freelancer right now to help with a design problem, I have to think through a little bit about how do I describe the problem. Then I need to go and look for someone and say, well, does this look like they have the right experience? Is it the right price? Can we agree on terms? Are they available? And very quickly you start to see all these questions that basically become your transaction costs. And so the difference between knowing where the person is and simply going and asking them to do something, and having to search for them and evaluate, hire, figure out how to work with them, sign a contract, all those additional things are transaction costs. Anyway, so the reason that's important is, at the time that Ronald was exploring this, there were certain assumptions that were true, right? I had a telephone, I didn't have email. I had maybe a low level of trust because I couldn't figure out reputation, and today I have reputation systems, so I can quickly learn about people independent of what they say about themselves. I had an expectation that I would walk into a space and everyone that I needed to work with would be there. Today I have more comfort working remotely. So these are just some of the changes. So then we can look at how those manifest, right? So we can take an example like Wikipedia, which is an old example, but when you view it in the context of transaction costs, if you were Encyclopedia Britannica and you designed your firm along assumptions that Ronald Coase has laid out, you've already decided who works for you, right? Someone else comes along and says, well, actually, you know what, I don't need a lot of these people to work for me. I can get them to volunteer time, and instead of 10 people working full-time, I can have 1,000 people that come in periodically and edit, right? Those aren't the exact numbers, but just to give you an example. And then we see that play out over and over again. We don't really think about Skype in terms of transaction costs, but the reality is we click a button, Skype automatically in the background finds us the network of other people with Skype, and we get access to their bandwidth, we get access to their CPU, and a network is built. But we don't think about it as, from a transaction cost perspective, we're not having to build a network ourselves, right? And that changes things dramatically, is just knowing that there's someone who's trusted, whose machines I can access and whose network I can use. That's effectively what makes Skype work. And so we can find different categories of of crowds that suddenly come together online because transaction costs are much lower. If you've ever used Airbnb, if you travel and have used Airbnb, you're tapping into a firm that has really figured out how to reduce transaction costs. I can be half a world away, I can look online, find a space. The person that wants to rent me the space can quickly find out about me and establish trust. They have my phone number, they know what social networks I belong to. We can even figure out if we know people in common. And so, again, driving down the transaction costs to the point where, as an individual, I have access to background and I have an ability to enforce a contract in a way that I didn't have before. And so we have categories. We can think about this broadly in terms of, the crowd as a way to get assets, right? So cars or expensive things like apartments, etc. We can think of the crowd as a way to get money, right? So again, reducing the costs of, I don't go through a bank anymore, I can go to a crowd and crowdfund, right? Reducing access to data, right? So I'm not going to a research company to generate sets of data, I'm just collecting it from users, from a crowd of people that use my application or service. And then we get into more sort of subtle areas that crowds can provide us. Obviously, one we care about a lot is work, and then the other is networks, right? So we don't think about the idea that today, in order for us to tap into our networks of friends and their friends, gets systematically easier, right? Between Facebook and Twitter, tapping into networks of networks has become a much easier and sort of simpler, low transaction cost process. So we've got all these things where, going back almost 100 years, the transaction costs were at one level, and now we've seen them drop really, in a lot of cases to nothing. And so we can rethink how we organize people. So that's the context. Going back a similar amount of time to the person who created brainstorming, a gentleman by the name of Alex Osborne. So he had he was a partner in a fantastically successful advertising agency in New York called BBDO. He was the O, obviously, in BBDO. And people were trying to figure out, well, what is it about these guys? Like, what have they figured out that the other agencies hadn't figured out? And Osborne landed up writing books about, creativity and how it was that they'd succeeded. And one of the chapters described this process of storming, getting a bunch of brains together and storming a problem, right? So using the sort of war-like metaphors of the time, how do I get a bunch of people together and attack a problem? And in his sort of language, it was sort of the brains and get the brains in the room and then storm. And what's interesting is he actually laid out a process which, I think we tend to forget. On the one hand, we're all familiar with this idea of generating ideas, but he actually was very insistent that there was another equally important step of evaluating ideas. And so you'll hear me talk a lot about that. But that's really the inspiration. These two things are the inspiration for crowdstorming. On the one hand, this shift in transaction costs, which is going to nothing, and on the other hand, this very basic process of, instead of one smart person trying to figure out the answer to a problem, get a bunch of people together, let them propose solutions, and then let them evaluate those solutions, right? And that, in a very simple way, is what we're going to be talking about in this class. All right, so a little quick note about how we're going to organize this. So this is the second time we're running the class, and we're going to use a similar structure, and I'll point out what we've changed, because we got some great feedback from the first class. Each of the sections, you'll notice, the syllabus maps out based on the Crowdstorm book, the theory, right? So the theory is a mix of things. It's a framework or sort of checklists or diagrams that we've devised that try to generalize steps in order to get to a good result. Now, the way of thinking about that is not so much that this is the answer, there's lots of different options, but more that this is a way to at least think about all the ways in which you could organize, but also all the ways in which you might fail, or all the opportunities there are to have this not work, right? So that may still happen, but hopefully you've at least thought about it, and when something goes wrong, you can say, I remember in Sean's class, in this note, he said to watch out for this thing. That would be good. And so that's the theory. And so you'll see frameworks, you'll see case studies, there's a lot of them, and then you'll see some links to academic research. So we have the basics. So this video, if you watch this, you can get started. Sort of links to case studies, and then if you want to read the book, great. That's got a lot more of the background. And so, let's see. Moving on, we can go to a little bit about the 3 things we care about today. So for today, we're going to focus on what I think is the core. Each of these things gets more complicated, but I just want to introduce really three ideas, right? And this is enough to do your first assignment. So the first is this concept of a brief, right? And so a lot of us encounter briefs in different ways, right? Some of us might see an RFP, right? A request for proposal. It's very common in, let's say, consulting or agency businesses. Some of us may have written a job description. It's kind of brief. Basically lets people know what skills, what type of person you're looking for so that they can respond. But a brief is effectively a way for us to convey to a group of people what it is that we would like from them, right? So what's the context? Why do we care about this problem? What has been tried? What has inspired us? What do we like? What don't we like? If we receive an idea, how would we evaluate that? Right? So what questions would we ask? Very often you'll see things like viability and feasibility, or there's lots of ilities for some reason, right? So there's some view like viability where I would say, okay, this is a great idea. I would love to give everyone free bicycle helmets because it would increase safety. But who's going to pay for it, right? Economically, that may not be viable, right? Maybe a government somewhere could pay for it, but the idea of government paying for everything is less and less popular. So viability is often a simple way of saying, that's great, I'm happy to look at whatever you send me, but please make sure that you understand the economics of what you're proposing. Feasibility is, a slightly different question, which often relates to technically, is it possible, right? And this is often tricky because you may have to build out a prototype to answer that question, or if you've seen the thing work before, you could say, well, it's based on this idea that we've seen before, and it's, so it's 90% we know that it will work, and we've got the small piece that won't work. So the brief is really a way to guide people through, from the beginning, what is it that I care about? What's the problem, right? So for your project, each of you is basically saying you already have an idea, hopefully, of a big problem that you'd like to solve. And so you can tell the story about what it is. How did you think about it? Why do you think it's a problem? Why should other people care about it? And then what would you like to do about it, right? Or how do you think people could solve that? And then you want to give people some guidelines to say, well, I would, in the first class we said, let's solve traffic congestion, right? And we didn't say to people, you have to address the problem by changing the roads. We didn't say to them, you have to solve traffic congestion by modifying cars. We just said, however you'd like to solve the problem, here is the problem, here's why it's worth solving, and really we're open to anything. But when you consider solving the problem, please bear in mind that you should think about the cost, you should think about the technical feasibility, and you should think about the time to impact, right? So if I can't roll this out fast enough and it's going to take me decades, it's less interesting than something that maybe is less effective, but I could do in 5 years. And so one of the things you'll see for this session is you'll see a lot of examples from people like GE, X Prize, Starbucks Beta Cup, Lego Crusoe. We even have an example of a venture capital firm. So they really haven't given any particular problem. They've said, look, we'll look at anything as long as it meets these criteria, right? So again, it's evaluation criteria. So that's the brief. I'm going to spend a lot of time on that because that's really what you need to deliver for the first session, your first project, is a draft brief. And don't worry about, if you have questions, we're going to come back and revise those as we learn more. The other important part of the brief, and I touched on this a little bit, is why should people care, or why should they participate? And so we have a simple way of thinking about incentives, we will call GAME. not gamification, just game. And the idea behind game is just a way to remember a couple of key things. Good, attention, money, and experience, right? So if you take those four categories, actually, they each are sort of interesting ways to build out. But good is sort of social good. So things that people might feel that if they contribute something, they'd be doing something good for society, right? In a very general term. So you could think about sustainability related issues or education or healthcare, things that very often at the moment are top of the agenda because they impact so many of us and a lot of us care about them. If there's a way to participate in that and address or improve one of those areas, we could think about that as falling under good. Attention, I like to always think about American Idol as sort of the version of attention. But there's lots of different forms of attention. There's sort of simple recognition. There's ways in which it's more of a celebrity idea. There's peer recognition that your work is good. There's the ability to be featured in traditional media, make it onto CNN or whatever your favorite news program is, or make it into the New York Times or whatever your favorite newspaper is. But you get the idea. If I can get attention or find a way to give people attention, that's also useful. So we have good, we have attention, and then we have money. Now money is complicated because there really is a wide range of ways to think about money, right? There's the simple sort of question about how much, but there's another important thing, which is when do I get the money and what is it connected to? So what do I mean by that? Well, in a traditional sort of contest model, the contest says the winner gets X prize, right? So if you go to Threadless and design a t-shirt, here's $1,000 or $5,000 or whatever it might be. It gets more complicated if you go to something like Quirky. Quirky's model says that if you help them to come up with a new product, you get nothing immediately. However, you own a percent of future sales, right? So you have a share of future revenue. So we've worked on that with a company like 888, right? So 888 did designs of helmets. Initially there was nothing, but then they went off and sold, hundreds of thousands of units, and a certain percent went to the designer of those helmets, right? So in other words, it's a way to say in the short term you get less, but if your work is really good and everyone does well, you can get more. And then the really end of the spectrum in terms of sort of future rewards is not just connected with sales, but connected with the value of a whole enterprise. So this is very often what startups think about when they say, I would like to have X amount of equity, or the founders have a certain amount of equity, or investors get a certain equity amount. And the idea of equity is a little different than revenue shares because, in Quirky or in 888, once that product is discontinued, there's no more revenue for that person. In an equity world, if you owned a piece of the company, it really wouldn't matter what product or service they were selling. If the company got bigger, your equity would be worth more, right? And so those are the end of the spectrums. On the one end of money is simply, thank you very much, here's your $100 for your idea, and I'll pay you that today. Don't worry about how much money I make from your idea. Somewhere in the middle is, well, I'm not going to give you money now, but if your idea is as good as I think it is, and my company is as good as you think it is, we should be able to sell lots of whatever it is that we've come up with, and you can have a share of that. And then finally is the sort of traditional startup perspective, which is if you are successful, you get to keep your idea. I'm going to own a piece of that idea. And so together, if we do well, eventually if the company's sold or if it lists on the stock exchange, you'll own a piece of that, and that's how you benefit. Okay, so that's money. And then finally is experience. And experience is sort of a catch-all for a lot of different types of experiences, right? So one type of experience is simply something that you couldn't pay for, right? So something very exclusive, maybe meeting someone. Or getting a signed copy of something. Another way to think about experience is educational experience, in the sense of I get to work with a group of people and learn from them and get feedback from them, which would be very difficult to do in a normal learning environment, right? So hopefully one of the reasons that you participate in the class project is experience driven, right? It's the opportunity to say, work on a brief and get feedback from your peers and from me, and hopefully that helps you to improve and you learn something. I'm betting that's one incentive. So that's it. Those are the incentives. We've got good attention, money, and experience, and obviously within those we've touched on a few. And you'll notice again, as you look at the briefs in the syllabus, you'll see very different range of incentives, right? You'll see GE that is very focused on partnerships and equity. They want you to keep the idea and build the idea, and they just want a stake. They want to benefit in that. Very different to, say, Lego Kuso, who's saying, you know, if you give us an idea, you can have a percentage of the revenue from that. And very different again from, let's say, Life Edited, where there was a contract award, right? So not a share in the revenue, but just a contract award to complete the design, and a cash prize to recognize the winner. All right, so let's move on. So we've got, so far we've covered the brief, we've discussed incentives, and so the final part is, for the first brief, just to keep things simple, we're going to use the simplest pattern, right? So what do I mean by pattern? Well, we touched on this idea of brainstorming as being first source the ideas and then evaluate them, right? One very simple way to do that is to simply advertise your idea and ask people to send you their, advertise your brief and ask people to send you ideas. Now the ideas might be a napkin sketch, they might be a concept, they might be a working prototype, they might be a software algorithm, it doesn't matter. You will tell them where to send the idea. And the process that you would use to evaluate, you'll say, well, I'll tell you if you won. I'll get back to you. Basically, that's how simple search works. Search is literally you advertising your brief through PR, through search marketing, through social media, through whatever channels you can reach people, and them sending you ideas. And they can do that by email or an online form, or if it's a prototype, maybe they can ship it to you. But the point is, once you have all the solutions, you figure out your process for picking a winner, and then you let everyone know who won. The reason that's the simplest is that actually you can make that much more complex, right? So as one simple additional step, you could say, the way in which we're going to judge the winner is we're going to have a race, right? Or the way in which we're going to judge a winner is we're going to have people vote, right? So American Idol style, you know, you make it through if you get enough votes. But we're going to leave that for next time, right? So simple search for today. Again, you're going to notice that a lot of the briefs deal with simple search, and so that's what you're going to be writing for. So last few words on the project. So first step I'm going to ask you to do is to create your brief, right? Describe the problem, give us a reason why we should be helping you, explain how you are going to choose the winner and how we can share our result, and then tell us a little bit about what's the format of the response. Do you want a concept, or do you want something further along, a business plan, a working prototype, an algorithm, whatever it is that you think is appropriate. And that is going to be our first step, and we will take it from there. We'll introduce some more complex ideas, and don't worry, you'll come back and modify your briefs, but the basic problem is probably not going to change too much. How we evaluate and what the process is for sending ideas and evaluating them, that we're going to get into a lot more. And maybe you'll, based on your feedback, you'll change some of the problem statement and the incentives. Anyway, thank you very much for joining, and hopefully this will be fun and interesting. And feel free to use the discussion sections to ask questions. I'll post some notes to that as well. Definitely post your first draft as you think about it. Don't worry about making it too perfect. Just get something out in the beginning so we can all start to look at it and give you responses. And hopefully you'll enjoy the class. Thanks very much.